Okay, good night. And Susan was just saying to me, I need to probably remind people about what I spoke about the last time. But yeah, we're going to try to do a quick recap on some of the things that we did the last time, just to keep us in tune. I've been trying to explore marriage. And I started out first by saying, I think there's such richness there that we have to capture. Very often when people like me, or people approach me because of the work I do in the tribunal, it's always the negative side we see, or the bad things, if you like. But there's such beauty and richness in marriage. And no matter how many people have experienced negative things there, I want to say and I want to reinforce again the wonderful and beautiful vocation that many of the faithful are called to live and to witness to in the sacrament of marriage. And let's not lose sight of that, because that's the one side of the coin that I've been trying to explore. And I challenge us to look again at marriage as sacrament. And if you recall, I challenge people to even explore sacrament a little bit differently than how we have done traditionally. Because I think very often, traditionally, we Catholics have grown up with this kind of way of understanding sacraments as things. You know, we come to the church to get the thing. Now, once you get the thing, it's done. And that's the action we have seen very often. Parents come to the church to baptize the babies. They get the thing, they're gone. We don't see them again. Huh? Plenty of times we don't see them again until they're ready for the other thing. And so we go through. I remember sharing with you one of our priests back home in Guyana who had coined a phrase about Catholics, not just the C and E Catholics, that one we know, right? Christmas and Easter. I think it's Good Friday, not Easter so much. But he had another more graphic one. He says, hatched, matched, and dispatched Catholics. Right? And those were the significant moments that we saw them. We baptized them, we married them, and buried them. Right? But I think we have to start looking again at sacraments, not so much as things that we get, but rather as encounter with the living God that invites us into relationship. And that's a much more dynamic way of exploring the sacraments that will continue to invite us into that very heart of our God. So beautiful that we started out with our worship and praise just now. You know, that's why we were made, you know. That's the only reason that we exist, is to give praise to God. Nothing else. And when we don't, we are not fulfilling what we were made for. So, marriage then as sacrament, and I went into that a little bit because very often we think that when you ask many couples, you know, about the sacrament of marriage, you say, well, we went to the church and Father gave me the blessing. You see the thing. He put the thing on we. No. The sacrament of marriage is what the couple become. They become the sacrament. In other words, they are invited to become that place where God is encountered. So it is in the relationship of a husband and wife that they encounter God, the living presence of God. So for themselves, first of all, and then if you recall, I went into that for their family, their children, and for the wider family. And therefore, marriage is not a little private affair between two people who go somewhere under some and say, I love you. No, no, no. Marriage is rather a very public affair because you have, those of you who are called to this way of life, have a responsibility to us. Because it is in your relationship of love, of compassion, of forgiveness, that we will encounter the living presence of our God. And so you are called to be sacrament. Just as I am called as priest to be sacrament for you. To be the place where you encounter the living presence of God. In the same way, the married couple is called, by living that lifestyle, that vocation is called to be sacrament for us. You remember any of that? So that's the one side of the coin. Now then we started to look at what really makes a marriage. How does a marriage come about? And we spoke of they had way back in the tradition, they had a big discussion about this, what really makes a marriage. And it's the consent, the free consent of two persons, a man, I have to say it very clearly, and a woman, right, who freely give their consent that brings about a marriage. They freely give the consent to become married to each other. Right? That consent is what makes the marriage. Now, a marriage then is ratified when the consent is exchanged. What we traditionally call the vows. When I say, I do to you, right? And you say, I do to you. In that moment, when the consent is given, the marriage is ratified. It then has to be consummated by the act of sexual intercourse. The marriage that is ratified now is consummated. And when that marriage is so celebrated, nobody can put an end to it. A ratified and consummated marriage, sealed, covenant, cannot be broken. Oh, how they say it on the wedding day, until death do us part. So you with me? Now that is why we don't accept civil divorce as ending a marriage. You with me? This, and I spoke of this. The civil divorce is a legal instrument that the state uses to end a marriage. With me? But the church, the Catholic Church, our church, does not accept that instrument as ending a marriage until death do us part. Covenant relationship, bound, ratified by the consent of the parties freely given, and consummated by the act of giving themselves totally to each other in that act of sexual intercourse, consummating that marriage. That marriage then is for life, right? Covenant relationship. And I did go into a little bit about covenant relationship as, again, simple contractual relationship, right? Covenant, biblical term that we use to express what marriage is, because it binds us for life, right? No divorce. All right? You with me so far? So, because many people have a problem when we speak of a declaration of nullity, or in fact, you hear a lot of people say annulment. They're going for an annulment. I try to avoid myself the term annulment because it suggests for many people that it's a Catholic divorce. Right? And that's the concept people have. So you go to the civil courts to get the civil divorce, so you come to the church court to get the Catholic divorce. It ain't got nothing like Catholic divorce. Nothing like it. It doesn't exist. Okay?
okay? And that's why I challenge people not to use the term annulment, because annulment, a lot of people have problems with that term because it seems to suggest that there is something there and then we use this thing we call annulment to wipe it away. Right? Like sometimes the civil jurisdiction does in the civil divorce. Marriage, and then we wipe it away with civil divorce. No. Right? No. And you will see why this is important, because a lot of people have problems when, for example, they have gotten married, they have children from that marriage, and then you suddenly start to talk about the marriage, you know, there's annulment and it wiped away and it doesn't exist anymore. So what happened with my children, Father? Don't they exist? Are they illegitimate? Those are questions that rise in people's hearts and minds. What happened with them? Right? So we have to understand, a declaration of nullity is not saying that something did not happen. For goodness sake, you got your photographs. You know, sometimes when we priests don't make, as we're required by church law to, you know, to write into the baptism record that you get baptized and so on. So I have had cases, somebody comes back and say, they want a copy of their baptism, but we can't find no record. Father, I know I baptize. I know my child baptized, or so they will say. And then they will bring the photograph and show it, look at there. Right? So, as they say, the camera don't lie, right? So, you have your photographs. On that particular day, the two people dressed up in what we see as bride and groom. They went in the church before the priest. They said what they said and what they were required. All that happened. So we ain't wiping nothing away and said that didn't happen. Huh? It would be stupid of us. We can't deny that. So when on the wedding day a man and a woman comes to the church, as we say, dressed as a bride, some of them overdress or underdress, but you get my point, right? I had a couple once, not in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not a marriage officer here, so I don't really do marriages. But I had a couple once in another jurisdiction, and they came in to start their process of getting married, you know. And in my first interview with them, they look at me and they say, Father, we were thinking about Hawaii. I said, go Hawaii. Go Hawaii. Because I knew what next was coming. Is the grass skirts and the this and the that and whatever. So sometimes the dresses and so can be overdone, whatever, anyway, or underdone. But on that day, they stood up there, they said to each other that I take you to be my husband, I take you to be my wife. They did all of that. Right? And we can't just simply and say we wiping it away and we don't acknowledge that it happened. It happened. And a declaration of nullity doesn't wipe anything away. Right? What a declaration of nullity will do is now investigate that marriage and determine that at that time, when everybody presumed that there was a valid marriage, the two parties, the priest and the witnesses, the state, everybody presumed it was a valid marriage. But now, after the fact, evidence is brought forth to show that there was a defect in the consent that was exchanged. Right? And because of that, the church will now declare and make a declaration of nullity of that marriage. In other words, that the marriage is invalid based on that fact. Right? Now, it's like the presumption in law. A person is innocent until proven guilty. Innocent is the presumption. And only when evidence is led to the contrary can a judgment be then declared that the person is guilty. Not before. In the same way, marriage enjoys the favor of law. Therefore, it is held up until it is proven otherwise. Right? So you can't say that a marriage is invalid until evidence is led to make that judgment, that decision, that based on the evidence received, we can now say that this marriage was invalid at the time that the exchange of the consent was given. Now, just a little example might help you. So, for example, two young people, they meet, as they say, they fall in love. I never could understand that term, but they fall in love. Right? They meet and they have this relationship going. And as I said in one of my sessions with you before, I honestly believe, and it's something I think we have to look at seriously, that our relationships today move very quickly from friendship to a physical, sexual relationship. And I think that changes the scenario very, very clearly. So that the couple gets involved physically in a sexual relationship, they forget about friendship, it moves the relationship on a different level, and also, you know what very often results? Somebody becomes pregnant, or I should say, they become pregnant, because it was now wonders make it happen. Right? They become pregnant. When that happens, as you know, in our culture, it is not just simply long ago. It's not a long time story. It's very much present even today. Right? Maybe more so long time, but it's still there. Very often they might be young. I knew a case that I did. She was something like 14, maybe 15. Right? She got pregnant. And the families came down very, very hard and say, you got her married. You're bringing no bastard child into my house. And you know that kind of language is used, and the pressure is on. They must get married. Right? Must get married. Now, bear in mind what I said about consent. It must be freely given. Now, for that consent to be freely given, right, you got to look and see, was there pressure being exerted on the person to make the decision to marry? How much was it her decision at that time? And that pressure can come from external forces or internally. Or internally. So externally, the pressure could be on. The family said, I will kill you. I'm using this thing, but I'm telling you, it actually happens. Parents threaten their children, I'll kill you. Right? And so some people realize they have no choice but to follow the wishes of parents or guardians or elders or whatever and get married. On the internal side, that person might be, for example, a very good person. Wasn't bad. They have been trying to live a good life. This thing happened to them. They find themselves pregnant. They know why they get there. Being stupid. You know, once I had a lady came to me and she was looking for help, and then she was pregnant. And she said to me, well, you know, a priest in another place in the country, is he make it happen? I said, how? He said, well, he put me by this man, this old man, to look after you. And the old man, father, the old man look at me and smile. I said, and I stupid. And I stupid. So we know how it happened, but okay, people, for whatever reason, it happened. Now that person might be a good person trying to live that, involved in church and all of that. She now start to put pressure on herself. This is a bad thing. I can't do, you know, I have to get married. I can't. The thought of becoming a mother, having a child out, and you're not married is too much. She can't handle it herself. It's not necessarily her parents pressuring her. She is pressuring herself. So this could be pressure. Right? There's something like reverential fear the code speaks of. I had a case once. Young girl, large family, father sick, mother worried about how she will provide for the family. Right? Small village, not city. Young man comes into the village. Well, he not that young, but mother says, there's going to be one less mouth to feed, and maybe he could even help me with feeding the rest. Right? Child at school, she takes the child out to school, you marry him. She'd lock them up in the bedroom prior to the arrangement for marriage. All of this, you see, I'm trying to get you to see, right? That child, and she was a child, had no choice. In her evidence, she would say things like, where would I go? Small village. Nobody would listen to me or hear me. More than that, you don't tell your parents no. You have that reverential fear. You can't tell your parents no. This is what they want. You got to follow it. She cried the whole day of the wedding, from beginning to end. All the evidence brought out that. Do you think she was freely giving consent to marry this man? No. Do you think that was a marriage? No. So the marriage broke down. And she petitioned us for a declaration of nullity. So, and then we said a declaration of nullity, there are three ways. Right? A marriage can be declared invalid. Right? Remember that? The consent of the parties, therefore, that's what I was talking about. The consent must not be defective. Right? So I must freely, it's an act of the will, freely given, that I say I take you to be married to you, to form this covenant relationship for the rest of my life. Right? Now, again, all of that is important. So if somebody, for example, comes and says, well, yes, I can marry you. But as the Trinidadian Calypsonian said, I got a deputy. So we got to be careful. In other words, I am committing myself in making that commitment to you, giving my consent is to you. It's an exclusive commitment to you and you alone, not deputy essential. Right? It's only sheriff we're talking about. No deputy essential. So it's to you and you alone. Right? Now, if the gentleman has a girlfriend, he courting this one. He got a girlfriend going on the side there. He asked this one to marry him, but he still got the girlfriend on the side. The night before the wedding, he there by the girlfriend house. Sleeping with you. She ain't know, you know. The wife to be ain't know. They stand up on the day of the wedding and say, yes, I do. We have to ask, and the evidence will now be led, what really he said, I do too. In other words, what was his intention when he was making that consent to marry this person? Now, unfaithfulness itself doesn't invalidate the marriage. And very often, that's how many times people think so, that because somebody was unfaithful is the end of the marriage. No, no, no. And many of us will know of many instances where people may have been unfaithful, they admit to it, they get help, and they move beyond it. And they're reconciled, and the marriage goes on, and they live a very beautiful life. So the unfaithfulness itself doesn't invalidate it. What we have to show, and the evidence has to show, is that this person never had the intention to be faithful. He didn't give up the girlfriend. The night before the wedding, he buy the girlfriend. After the wedding, it continued. He never gave up. And they had others too. So clearly, if the evidence is showing that this person really had no intention to be faithful to this person, right? A defective consent. So the consent itself, and most of the cases in terms of a judicial process, is to do the consent, to look at the consent. We also mentioned that that consent has to be legitimately manifested. Therefore, that's the form of marriage. For the first one, a defective consent. Secondly, a marriage can be declared invalid because it was defective in terms of how the consent was manifested. For Catholics, remember I mentioned that, you're required to follow a form of marriage. So a Catholic, beautiful Catholic woman falls in love with a man who is not Catholic, and they decide to go and marry at the registrar's, I don't know what you call it here, the registry office here, right? That marriage is invalid in the eyes of the church because the Catholic party, there's a Catholic party involved, even though both were not Catholic, one was, and they are required, therefore, to celebrate marriage in the form prescribed for Catholics. Now, that person, if for a good reason, can ask for a dispensation from canonical form to get married somewhere else other than in the Catholic Church. But most times, that's not asked for, and you wouldn't probably have valid reasons for asking for it. Sometimes I've known couples who, for example, they want to go to the instruction classes, the preparation. So they say, man, them Catholics is pure stupidness and all kind of. So we just go by the registrar and get married. But it's an invalid marriage. Right? You with me? So the marriage can be declared invalid based on the consent, a defective consent. It can be declared invalid because it lacked canonical form or was not properly, there are rules in which that marriage has to be celebrated. In other words, before the bishop or priest, parish priest or deacon with two witnesses. So if that wasn't there, invalid. And then the third one, what was the third one? That there was an impediment to the marriage. So the marriage, for example, I go down the road, well, far down the road in Cedros, and I say I'm going to get married to a nice girl in Cedros. They ain't know me down there, you know. Right? It will be invalid if it happens. It will be invalid because I am bound by my vows as a priest. Yes? So I can't get, that's an impediment, and it's a strong impediment. Not the bishop here, the local bishop can't dispense it. It has to go to Rome. Right? Only the Holy Father can dispense me from my vows as a cleric, as a priest. In other words, laicize me, bring me back to the state of the laity. But that's probably a difficult one. But think about another impediment. Very simple one, but very much around. Catholic person want to get married to a Hindu. It's an impediment. It's a block. In other words, Catholic should marry a Catholic. That's the rule. Right? So the impediment is there, but that impediment can be dispensed. When an impediment is dispensed, a dispensation is a relaxation of the law that allows it to happen. Right? So a Catholic girl wants to marry a Hindu boy in the Catholic Church, that the priest who is working with them has to apply to the chancery for a dispensation from disparity of cult. And that's what it's called. In order for this Catholic to marry a non-baptized person. Now, if that wasn't granted, and I've done some cases like that, then, for some reason, oversight, whatever, but it wasn't granted, the dispensation wasn't granted, it is an invalid marriage and can be so declared. Now, in the canonical form and the impediment, it is what is called a documentary process. It's not a long, drawn-out process, right? The party will present documents to the tribunal, and through those authentic documents, they have to be authenticated, those authentic documents, so for example, canonical form. A couple went and they got married. They might be both Catholic or one Catholic and one somebody else. And they went and they got married in the registry office. The marriage broke down. They have a civil divorce. Now the person wants to get married in the church. Right? So they come to the tribunal and they present the documents. Baptism, birth. I ask for birth certificate to make sure it's the same person they're dealing with. Baptism certificate. Show that the one at least was baptized in the Catholic Church. Marriage certificate showing where they got married, to prove that they got married outside of the Catholic Church. The divorce absolute, showing that the marriage is ended and finished. I then have to check the chancery's records to see that no dispensation was granted from canonical form. Therefore, that marriage was invalid. And I therefore will, through a documentary process with the documents, so it's very simple, it's not long and drawn out. Once the person presents the documents, I can declare that marriage null, void, invalid, and therefore the person is now free to enter marriage in the Catholic Church. You with me? In the same way, the impediment, if a marriage took place and there was an impediment and it was not dispensed from, I can do the same thing with a documentary process. And it doesn't take long. Once the documents are presented to us, we authenticate the documents, we can declare it. 10 minutes and I could be finished with that case. So it's easy, and I'm pointing out that those are two ways. The one that takes some time is the judicial process. It's a court process, and I want to do a little work on that now. You know, not too long ago we had the readings when St. Paul said, don't go and bring your story to the civil court. You remember that? Yeah? He said, why y'all behaving like that? Settle your differences, and so you shouldn't have differences. But if it happens, because human nature affected by sin, we can have. So if it happens, okay, but settle it among yourselves. Right? Remember that? Now, the church has its own court system. You have a civil jurisdiction, which is the state, has their courts, and they set it up so people can go to the courts to bring settlement between disputes and so on between different parties, yeah? You go to court. But the church has also its court system, right? And that's what is referred to as the tribunal or a court, all right, of the church. Every diocese would have a tribunal because every diocese, the bishop is the judge of the tribunal. He is the official judge of the tribunal. But the bishop doesn't do it by himself. He normally would delegate that authority or power to someone else who is trained. Now, we are lucky in this archdiocese, we have a bishop who is trained as a canonist, Archbishop Harris. But in many dioceses, the bishops might not be trained necessarily as a canonist. So they rely on one who is trained and appoint that person to be the judge of the tribunal. The judge of that tribunal will then always act in the name of the bishop. So you can't appeal the decision of the judge in the tribunal to the bishop, because he's judging in the name of the bishop. Now, the courts itself is set up. There are similarities to the civil courts and there are differences. Right? So each diocese would normally have a court set up, a tribunal. You would have officers of the court or tribunal, just as you have in the civil jurisdiction. The one who is overall in charge of the court is referred to as the judicial vicar, the role at the moment that I hold. Right? So the judicial vicar is in charge of the entire court, oversees the court. I suppose a parallel would be in the civil jurisdiction, the chief justice or chancellor, right, of the judiciary. Right? Overall in charge and administers the justice in the name of the bishop for that court. Then you can have other judges in that court. So other than the judicial vicar who has overall responsibility for the tribunal in the name of the bishop, you have judges also who can be named in that tribunal. You have to be trained in the law. And then you have what is called the defender of the bond. The defender of the bond in marriage cases defends the bond of marriage. And that's an officer of the court as well who has to be trained. And then you have, also in the tribunals, you have a promoter of justice, who is one who will, in certain instances, has to take up the cause in the issue for justice. So he's the promoter of justice. It's not used in every situation, but you would have to have a promoter of justice. And then you have what is called auditors, who will audit the case, who will, move it along in the different stages, an auditor. And you have two other persons, which can be the same person performing the role, but they can be also different ones. A procurator. The procurator is the person who the party appoints, or the court sometimes appoints a procurator for the party, if one of the parties not taking part. The procurator stands in the place of the party before the court. Represents, can sign for the party, can do everything in the name of the party, but the party appoints him. And we usually have people who are trained to take on that role. And then you have, as I said, the procurator can also do that role, but you have what is called advocates. And this would be like your lawyer. When you got a case before the court, you go and get a lawyer. Well, advocates would plead the cause of the party before the court. Right? So it's a court system. It follows rules like the civil court. It follows rules. Procedural law is very important, because procedural law, the process, the laws that govern the process, guarantees people's rights. And not even the bishop can dispense of it, because it guarantees people's rights. So, for example, a petitioner comes and brings a petition before the court. You know who the petitioner is. The petitioner is the one who brings a petition to start the process. The court can't be convened. The judge can't start a process on his. It must be a person bringing a petition. So that person is the petitioner. Once that petition comes before the judge or the judicial vicar, who will look at the petition, if everything is okay by law, he then is required to accept the petition. And there are rules governing that too. So if he doesn't do it within a time frame, automatically it is accepted by the law stating so. So the judge or the judicial vicar accepts the petition, and the moment he accepts that petition, he has to cite the respondent. Now that is part of the rules I'm telling you that govern the process which we can't dispense from. Like somebody comes in and they say, well, how long it take? Well, no, I have to cite. Therefore, I have to write the other party, letting that person know that the petitioner has brought a cause before the court, inviting that other party to take part in the process, if they so wish. Right? And I have to give them a time which the laws governing the process says. So I can't say, well, I write the person, therefore I start the case. No. I have to wait for that citation to be given and then allow the person time to come back to us and say, I got your letter, I have no interest in it, so you could go on without me, or I would like to participate. Right? You with me? So that there are laws governing the process, which me, not the bishop, nobody can dispense those laws, because procedural law guarantees people's rights. That respondent have a right to be heard before the court. And if we deny the right, the whole process becomes null and void. You with me? So, a declaration of nullity. Marriage, first of all, we ask that people get their civil divorce. Why? Before they come to us. One, we will never allow, the first thing we will try to do is to reconcile. Right? So if people are having problems in their relationship, we will seek to help them to come to a place where they can be reconciled and that their relationship can be a good one. When they go through to the point where they have a civil divorce, very often that indicates to us everything is finished about that relationship. You with me? So they would normally get the civil divorce first and then they petition us. So one of the parties come, one of the two people come before us and petition. That petition has to be accepted by the judicial vicar, who then constitutes the court, naming who will be the judge, who will be the auditor, who will be the procurator is named by the party, and who will be the notary, the official notary. Right? So the court is now convened or constituted by the judicial vicar, and then the next thing he does is cite the respondent. Once the respondent has either responded to our invitation or says, no, I have no interest, or the time frame which we have given them has passed and they have not made contact, we then presume, because the letter we sent out say, if we don't hear from you in this time, then we will continue without you. But the thing is, so because we are not interested in putting blame, we're interested in finding out the truth, what happened here. And so we want the respondent to take part. We want to hear both parties. But if they don't want to participate, we can't force them. After that, when the respondent either indicates so, if he doesn't get on to us, then I can declare him absent from the process, and then we continue without him or her. We move then to trial, which means bringing in the proofs. So we have to then call the witnesses. I had a case the other day. The petitioner called me up and said, what happened? You don't call the witnesses? I said, I can't call the witnesses yet. The respondent has to be given time to respond first. So after the time frame has gone, then we call the witnesses in. The witnesses are brought in and their evidence is taken at the tribunal office. Right? The parties, if both are taking part, make their depositions, they make their give their sworn evidence to the court. So all the proofs are collected. It might be a case where we might have to get one of these expert witnesses involved, a psychiatrist or a psychologist or so on, to review or to think. All that has to be happened. All the proofs are collected, all the evidence, then the judge, not necessarily the judicial vicar, but the judge who is doing the case will then close the process. Right? He will first publish the acts, asking the parties through their procurators to see if there's more evidence to be given or anything like that. Once they said no, everything is, then he will close that up to that point, close the process. Therefore, no more evidence can be then submitted unless the judge feels that it's essential to the case. Close, and then it goes to the defender of the bond. The briefs, the advocates representing the parties will put their briefs. The defender of the bond puts his brief in, or her brief, before the court. And finally, it comes to the judge, who has to then make the decision. He can only judge from what is presented, not from things he might know or hear, or no. Only from what is given in the case, in the acts. So all the evidence before, he then has to go that through, and he has to come to a position of moral certitude. In other words, he has to come to the point where he can say, based on the evidence before him, this was not a marriage as the church teaches marriage to be, because the consent was defective, showing it and so on in his judgment. Once that judgment is made, the sentence for marriage cases must automatically be sent to a second court. Our second court is in Jamaica, Kingston, as we are the second court for them. Right? So the cases are then sent to the second court. The judgment of the judge at the first instance court is then reviewed, and if that judge in the second court agrees with it, it is final. And then it is executed. The parties are informed of the decision of the court. All right? So it's a process, and it takes some time sometimes. Now, we've been hearing in the news, the Holy Father say we need to. So they're reviewing it, because we canonists too, feel that they need to free up the process a little bit so it could make it less, so that it can be a little bit more, that the justice can be given to the parties very quickly. Now, sometimes in some courts like our own here right now in Trinidad, we are suffering from a backlog of cases, right? For various reasons. And because of that, it can hold up cases for a while. It shouldn't be that way, and I'm hoping that when we get eventually that backlog cleared, that our cases can proceed timely. It should be within a year for a process like this, the judicial process, to happen and judgment given. Not always, because as you can imagine, some cases are more difficult than others and require some extra time and effort and so on. Right? But the whole point, however, is to help persons who are seeking justice, and I'm dealing mainly with the marriage here, not other causes, that they can find that in a timely way, so that their lives can be made wholesome, that they can truly get there. Many of them, this is what the Holy Father is looking at. They're in a second marriage. It's not recognized by the church because they're divorced. And they need to have that first marriage looked at, and a declaration of nullity, if it can be granted, so that the persons can now fix up themselves in terms of their life in the church and return to the sacraments. So we know, especially here in Trinidad, and we have jurisdiction for 8 dioceses come under my jurisdiction right now, right? From Antigua coming all the way to Guyana. But in most of the other jurisdictions, we are fairly on time. It's Trinidad right now is a problem because we have a backlog, okay? But we are working, and hopefully we can truly help that. Now I think my time run out. You see, the thing is, no matter how much time we get, we seem to have more, right? But it is something that needs really more and more. And as I said to Susan, you know, I'm not available for the rest of the year now, but because she was offering me another Wednesday, but I'm not. But we can still, because we need to get people to understand this so that they can help us and we can help them. All I'm saying to you, at the end of the day, the supreme law of the church is that we must love. Right? And that we have to keep before us always. So that in everything we do, even in this process and the work, sometimes we meet such anger that still resides in people over broken relationships. And so we need to move people to a point where they can love, truly love. And that even if they have had a failed marriage, even if there's something there, that we can bring them to a point where they can truly let go of the anger, the pain, the hurt, and they can truly live as disciples of Christ who love. Amen?
Praise God. Well, I think one thing we know is that the Catholic Church does not do things vice-versa. At all. Father, one thing strikes me, and I think both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have alluded to this, that a very high percentage of couples getting married in our time, their marriages could be declared null and because they don't have a proper awareness of what they're going to, of faith formation, I suppose. And it really concerns me because what is the church doing to address this matter so that couples really are aware of the sacrament, of the gift of one another, of looking at marriage at the other person in a different way, and knowing the sacredness of married life? And what is the church doing to prepare couples for marriage?
That was one of the sessions I would really like to come and just do that alone. Preparation is essential. I'm sorry, but I will say it and say it on public television here, that most of the couples getting married today that I know, no. It's about the fete, it's about the dress, it's about the, and I keep saying to couples, no, I have absolutely no interest in planning a wedding with you. I want to plan marriage with you. A wedding is a day. It's over when the celebration's over. You take off the dress and it's over. We must start planning for marriage, which is for life. And our preparation is so essential, and it's really wanting. The bishops of our region have recognized this. It's on their agenda. They are looking at how we can start to seriously look at our preparation processes. And it's not preparation, as Sister is saying to us, not just simply when a month before they get married. It's preparation from since they're small, in the homes, in our catechism classes and Sunday schools or whatever we have, in our church communities. How are we forming people just as we want to form them to become priests or lay men and women who will be single and live a life consecrated to God? But we could also train them to become married people. And we ain't doing it properly. So I'm sorry, I'm going to come back with a session with that.